Welcome to Peel and Reveal, the podcast where we share stories about joy, purpose, and self-discovery. I'm Manna Linäs, and in this episode, I'm talking with Michael Murray, Director of Yoga and Wellness at Vikasa and co-founder of Sandana Yoga. Michael first turned to yoga to manage stress during his career as a finance lawyer, but what began as a physical practice quickly led to a deeper self-awareness and a shift towards a more fulfilling life. Today, Michael shares the transformative power of yoga through teacher trainings, retreats, and wellness programs, guiding others on their own journey of growth and connection. I met Michael this summer during my teacher training at Vikasa, and I was curious to hear his story. In this episode, we get to hear the story about his unconventional upbringing, the career burnout that sparked his spiritual journey, and how falling in love helped him redefine success and happiness. Let's dive in. So welcome, Michael.
Hi, Annalie. Great to be here.
Yeah, so in this episode, we're gonna, talk about all your life history and where you're at today. But I want to start where you kind of grew up. Who was little Michael?
Well, that's casting our minds pretty far back into the distant past. Yeah. But sure, let's go there. So little Michael, I actually often joke with Nikki, my wife, that there must be something wrong with me because I don't have very good memories of my childhood. Not that the memories are bad or good. I just can't recollect much from my childhood. And I'm told that there's some correlation between people that can't recollect their childhood times and being like a psychopath or something. So hopefully that's not the case with me. But I do know some about my childhood, and I can fill you in because it's actually, I was reflecting on this recently, and it's, I think, interesting how the journeys we go on, the sort of the full circle type experience, which is certainly true of my time. I grew up on what could be called a hippie commune, or a kind of like, spiritual community. So my parents were both social workers, and my mum was and is pretty Catholic, but Catholic in a kind of modern way. So like the idea of like living a mission, like practical outreach and bringing that into everyday life. So she, together with a couple of other beautiful weirdos, created this hippie commune in rural Victoria, which is outside of Melbourne in Australia. And basically their mission was to support people who needed it. Generally, they were people who were coming out of prison or had, quite bad psychological problems and had otherwise fallen through the cracks in the kind of treatment plan that was offered in Victoria, Australia. A kind of like almost like a rooming house of last resort. And all of it was, I guess, centered around their Catholic faith. There was a lot of like, worship and prayer, but again, in a kind of like modern, practical way, I think. So they formed a community about an hour and a half out of Melbourne in Victoria, and the community consisted of my family, it's my parents, myself, and eventually my two younger sisters, another family, two boys and a girl, the kids, and 4 or 5 other individuals and couples. So yeah, I started off living in that super weird environment, a hippie / religious commune. And that was the way things went for the early formative years of my life. The community disbanded when I was maybe, I think, 7 or 8 or something like that, after about 10 years in operation, as communities often do, because they're kind of utopian ideals of, the way the world could be if everything was amazing and there were no rules and all that kind of stuff. But because of all those things, they tend to fall apart. And so that's what happened with the community, which was called Hesed, when I was about 7 or 8, although my mum, if she listens to this, will correct me and tell me when it happened. But that was the early sort of formative years, living in a weird hippie commune in the middle of nowhere, each week with a bunch of other weirdos turning up, beautiful weirdos, but people with all sorts of problems.
Yeah. How do you think that shaped you?
Oh, in many ways, we can fast forward to the end of my story and then go back. But obviously here I am, living a form of a life of service, and definitely interested in a lot of those kind of ideals. And it can be no coincidence that I ended up back there. I think I've had a long deviation down the path of private school, law school, finance lawyer, and actually the funny thing is that other family that I just mentioned. Their eldest child, Amon, who's one of my best friends, and is the godfather of my oldest child. We're very close friends to this day. He went down a similar path to the one I did, and he was and remains an investment banker. So he hasn't done the full circle journey yet. He's strayed even further from the path than I did, I suspect. But those years clearly influenced me in a big way. I guess primarily by way of rebellion, because I remember leaving the community, and then we didn't move to Melbourne at that stage. Melbourne is a big city, 5 million people. We were living in the middle of nowhere. We moved to a little town just near where the community was, and I remember, one of the first things I did was, so we moved into this just a normal house in a normal street in Daylesford, a town in Victoria. And I remember we pulled up out the front for the first time. I got out of the car and I walked over the front yard. I was like a kid, right? What did I say, 7 or maybe even younger, I think, actually. And I just pulled my pants down and started peeing in the front garden, because that's what we'd done in the community, because it was out in the middle of nowhere and there weren't really any rules. So that was kind of normal. And then I remember that kind of started this like new phase in my life, which was actually like, what was it like in the real world? So you can't just sort of pee anywhere. There's toilets, for example. And that was a real period of adjustment for me, because it was at that age, I didn't really know what was real, and I was really struggling to fit in. And I had this weird family. They would send me off to school with like a weird lunch, homemade bread, and in hindsight, all beautiful, healthy stuff. But all my friends at school were having like crisps and sodas and that kind of stuff. So, looking back on it, amazing. But at the time, probably a little bit isolating, a little bit, putting me as like separating me out from others in a way that I struggled with as a kid. I really wanted to be like just a normal kid, just like everyone else. So that was then the next phase of my life, which was a real phase of trying to fit in, which lasted many years.
So I definitely want to hear more about like connecting it more to your current situation, and then I also now want to hear about like that rebellion years. I'm also thinking, before we go into that, since I think there will be people listening who maybe have a more, I would say, common growing up, and then they are in their spiritual phase now, like your mom, and they are doing all the stuff that, sending their kids with weird lunch boxes to school and stuff. What would you like advise those parents? Because I know you're a parent yourself.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, again, I can sort of fast forward to the end of my story now and look back at it through those eyes. And, I look at myself as now living a beautifully happy life. I look at myself, I couldn't wish for anything more. I love my wife. I've got 2 incredible kids. I have an amazing relationship with my mum. She's, one of the most important people in my life. I seek her out to catch up with her and spend time with her. So all of those things make me look back and go, what she did was perfect, because look how things ended up. So the advice I would give to people in that position, and to myself with my kids, is live your life, do what resonates for you, and don't be afraid of things like that. Things like your kids standing out as being different. I think, and again, I'm no expert, but the way I look at parenting is the best thing we can do for our kids is to lead by example, and to live the lives that we want to live, to be real, to be authentic, to live from the heart, to be intentional, to be and to exhibit love, unconditional, unadulterated, unfettered love for ourselves and those around us, and it'll rub off. That's as much as we can do. get too caught up in those things of, oh no, I'm not doing what the other parents are doing and so on, then I think that kind of energy of angst or, disconnection, uncertainty, I think that's an energy that will get picked up on by our kids, and it's not going to be helpful. So I'd just say, go for it, live the life you want, and just be present and loving to your kids. And if they get embarrassed by that, as I certainly did in respect of my parents, then eventually it should all work out, hopefully.
Okay, just have patience.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but that's beautiful. But talk a bit about your rebellion years, because I think that, it was probably also needed to kind of end up where you are now.
Yeah, I guess so. Although it lasted quite some time. I from those early days of the community breaking up and us moving into town, I did a few years of primary school in Daylesford, and then I was quite an academic kid, and so my parents thought that we needed to sort of access a broader schooling and education system. So we moved to Melbourne, and I went to I was accepted into a private boys' school called Xavier College. I know the Swedish education system is different, because I've heard a lot about it through Nikki, but the way it works in Australia is there are some great public schools and some not so great public schools, and public schools are free or basically free to attend. And then we have a private school system, which is often quite expensive to access. And I was the kid of two social workers who lived in a community with shared finances, so it's not like my family had money. But my grandfather, my mum's father, had been to this school. And had been a school captain and was really well regarded there. And so I think I got a bit of an inside running. I did some exams and was eventually awarded a pretty much a full scholarship for my whole time there. So I was super lucky.
What was it that triggered your, the last rebellion that's coming up after this?
I was a finance lawyer, a finance litigation lawyer for, in the end, it was 9 years, ending when I was in my early 30s. And I guess it was a few things. I look back and I actually can say I really enjoyed my job. I got a lot of, it was intellectually challenging and stimulating, and I got a lot out of that. I got a lot out of the cut and thrust of, a dispute, the ability to do a consensual deal that worked for everyone. I, on a daily basis, I actually really enjoyed it. But it was pretty all-encompassing in that, when I had a deal on, you just work sort of 20 hours a day, and then you just do that again and again and again. Then the deal was done. You have a moment to relax and chill out, and then you go straight into another one. So there was no time for anything else. And that sort of took its toll on personal relationships with family, friends, and partners. And I guess the fact that it was all encompassing meant I just sort of dove into it fully and didn't really sort of come up for breath and take stock and spend time considering whether it was what the bigger issues around purpose and so on. It was more just each day it was kind of interesting, so I just sort of kept with it. But that's probably a good way to describe those 9 years and the 5 years of law school before that and the years of high school before that, without much intentionality, just sort of, doing things. They're pretty good. They're pretty fun. Everything was sort of okay, but no big picture analysis, I guess. And, eventually, it got to the point where I had, a midlife crisis for 30 or something, one of those sort of cliched
first one.
moments. Yeah, exactly. The first of many, probably. I've actually read a really interesting book, one of my favorites, called Falling Upwards by Richard Rohr, where he talks about this idea of two halves to our life. We live our life, then we have this real fall, but it's a falling upwards because it leads us to something better and a more full spiritual life. But part of that book, he says, it's not binary. It's not just one falling upwards in our life. It can happen, 10 times or so. So I'm perfectly open and ready for the next ones to come. But, I had that in my early 30s, a kind of a moment or a period of time where I had a really bad relationship breakdown in my personal life, which then it caused me to just reconsider everything, because I'd been going on a specific track where it was like, okay, I was with this person, I was going to end up with that person. I was in this job, I was going to become a partner of that law firm, buy a house, get a mortgage, and go down that path. And I had some people in my life who had done that, and my partners at work who actually worked for them. Two partners in particular who lived very fulfilling lives for themselves doing that. But the interesting thing was, if I were to like forecast out my own life and put myself in their shoes and end up where they were, and they were very content and happy in that, I just didn't ever want that. So it was like, why was I on this path heading to a place that I didn't want to go? And it was that personal relationship breakdown that sort of jolted me a little bit and caused me to start looking at these things and to reconsider. Which is a pretty confronting thing to happen when you've just always had your eyes like this is the path that I was going on. And it was at that time, perhaps obviously, that yoga came into my life. I found the yoga practice through my sister, and started practicing pretty regularly, basically because it was the one moment in my very, very busy life, very busy work life, where I was fully present. What I found, again, in retrospect, as I look back and analysed all of this, that I was always caught up in just doing stuff, doing the next deal, the next phone call, the next email. And I wasn't actually just stopping and just reconsidering, is this what I want to be doing? And yoga was the tool to help me do that. So I was practicing, I found yoga. It caused me to like see there might be alternatives out there, which was, as I say, confronting, scary, but also really interesting and promising that, who knows what else is out there. I became quite addicted to that. So I practiced a lot to try and keep finding those moments of presence. And that was as we say, the beginning of that second rebellion.
I love that. Oh, and I kind of also want to kind of reflect a bit on what you're saying here, because I've just been out like traveling for many months, and it wasn't until I kind of came back or towards the end of my trip that I realized how small my world had become. And I guess, if you are from the time that you're like starting it at this private boys' school, like you're in a very kind of, this is my assumption, a very like small group of people, not in the amount of people, but in the interests and the habits and the work careers and the financial. So I guess you're not getting that much variation of different ways of living then. So I guess it was in a way very good that you came from something completely different, because it is quite, at least for me, it's quite scary to think that I want to be somewhere completely different, because everybody around me is kind of in my world and they are as used or are as unused to something else as I am.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting that it's one of the reasons why for as long as we can remember, people have been advocating travel, that, travel broadens your horizons and opens your mind. And it really does, because we can get stuck in these little bubbles. Like, as you so rightly pointed out, I went to that private boys' school in Melbourne, the eastern suburb, not just Melbourne, but the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, and then a university around the same area. So everything was very, even within that big, what's quite a large city, this was this very cliquey kind of, group of people. It's sort of, Melbourne is also really renowned for this, as many cities are, I guess. But it's like when you move in certain business circles, that you'd go to like a social event or something, and you'd ask someone, what school did you go to? It was really cliched. But it was because all of us went to the same schools and then the same universities and then worked for the same, in the same jobs. I'm still to this day in a WhatsApp group with my 20 best friends who I all went to high school with, which is crazy because I'm 39 now. I graduated high school over 20 years ago, but yeah, it's super cliquey. And so in a way that's beautiful, right? Because it's a beautiful, strong community. I've got friends who I've known forever who, once I made my drastic life changes, just no judgment whatsoever, they were beautiful about it. But equally, it was just becomes a bit of an echo chamber, right? You hear the same views. You have a limited sort of array of potential options because you're seeing what everyone else is doing. And it's only when you travel and you realize, wow, as you did, like how small your world had become, that you start seeing that the possibilities are infinite. They're endless. And that's sort of what happened with me at around that time of all of this introspection and like reconsideration, I made what was perhaps the best decision ever, which was to take some unpaid leave, to take three months unpaid leave from my job. I realized, because I'd sort of like had these realizations, but then I was still working, and I realized what was happening, that I was just going to keep getting sucked back into these deals, deal after deal. And that could happen for 5-10 years. I might actually not do anything with these newfound realizations. And the only way to like ponder them and to really, I guess, explore them further was to give myself some space to do that. So I took 3 months unpaid leave and went on what my secretary told me when I came back to work, that she and everyone else had been calling my Eat, Pray, Love tour.
I might have got some of those references too. So what was your Eat, Pray, Love tour like? What happened? What did you do?
Well, it was the beginning of the end of my old life, that's for sure. And my bosses, when I came back, and then when it all played out the way it did, said to me that this is why we don't let people take unpaid leave, because they go away and they see what the rest of the world is like. They said that in a joking way, but I think they sort of meant it. Basically, what I did is I just planned to take 3 months and to go traveling in Southeast Asia and to just practice as much yoga as I could, because I'd found that was the thing that was guiding me to presence, that was prompting all these other questions and self-exploration. So I wanted to just do a lot of that by myself, without, I was working hard, I was partying hard, I was, very social, I was doing a lot of that kind of stuff. I wanted to like let all of that go away by myself, practice a lot of yoga, journal a lot. I had a big journal that I was ready to fill up completely and sort of ponder my life's purpose. It was around this time I was reading all those books, like the one I just mentioned, Falling Upwards. Also, my other favorite, A Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. And then all the cliched but beautiful ones like The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I was really on that journey, which was new for me because I was, quite intellectual. I'd widely read, but none of that type of book. So I had all those books with me. I had my journal, I had my yoga mat, and I was traveling around Southeast Asia. And as part of that, very quickly I landed at Vikasa on Koh Samui, which is where I now am permanently. And I met Nikki. So hence the reference to the kind of Eat, Pray, Love tour, because I then, after the end of the 3 months, went back to work, and having like really like fallen for yoga, completely fallen in love, and like eyes wide with like possibility of all the things that might be out there, apart from just spending the rest of my life as a finance lawyer in Melbourne.
Yeah. Wow. I can imagine. I kind of want to kind of sneak in here and talk a bit about the yoga, at Vikasa, and also like your journey with yoga before that, because for me, before, and kind of to give people some reference, I met Michael at Vikasa 3 months ago or something, where I took my YTT, the yoga teachers training, and as opposed to many other yogis there, I had not done very much yoga. So this was kind of a calling from the jungle that I needed to learn yoga. And so for me, yoga before coming to Vikasa was a lot about just the physical part of it. And I now have a completely different relationship to yoga because of the methods that you have there that I will get you to share about. But like, what was your relationship to yoga before you came to Vikasa, and what type of yoga did you do, and so forth, and what happened when you landed there? Or maybe it was some detours between there.
Yeah, it's interesting because my very first like real taste of yoga, I would say, happened in the midst of that early midlife crisis, where I went to, my sister took me along to my first class, and I found myself in a very cliched way crying in shavasana, which, and I now, through the lens of being quite educated in the yoga world, understand was this basically this attention trap brought about by the physical practice, which caused me to like all of a sudden no longer be caught up in what I was doing, what I was going to do that night, who I was, the facade that I was putting out into the world, all of the things which were taking up a lot of my attention always. The attention trap of yoga and the moving meditation enabled me to sort of pierce through that, or to have that stripped away momentarily. And I had a moment of like just presence. I was lying on the mat in the shavasana. It was like, oh, this is just me. I'm a bit of a mess. I've got all these flaws, and I was like, and then the tears came. And so that I was lucky in that happened in that class. It was exactly what I needed, and it knocked me off course and sent me on a path of real discovery in that area, self-discovery. But it's interesting, again, to look back on our own paths, I think, and to also just acknowledge the things aren't always linear. And so it wasn't like that happened and then I was like, okay, now I'm on this like spiritual path of transformation. Because I look back at what I did after that, and I did a lot of physical yoga. I then became obsessed with like trying to do a handstand and all of these kind of things. But it's like something had got me, but I hadn't really been able at that point to unpack it and to understand it in the way that I do now. And maybe there are more layers of understanding to come. But at that time, I hadn't understood it. I just there was something there, and so I grabbed onto that and kept searching for that. So I was doing a lot of, vinyasa yoga or power yoga, a lot of like very physical yoga practices. That's what I was doing at the very start. And the way that I found myself to Vikasa was because I was asking people in my yoga studio in Melbourne, like, where should I go practice in Asia? And Vikasa got a prominent kind of mention from two people at that studio because it was sort of renowned for like being a really strong and reputed yoga school. And so that was the second sort of stop on my trip, albeit it ended up being my last. So I had all these plans to then go on to Bali and India and other places. But I met Nikki and I did go to the next trip, which was Sri Lanka, because I was meeting a friend to do some surfing. But I spent the 5 days with him just sort of saying I want to go back to Koh Samui. So I cancelled the rest of my trip and went back to Koh Samui and really sort of just dove into, from a yoga side of things, that specific style of practice, which we can talk more about, of course, but also just, being head over heels in love, which was not something I had been expecting at all, because I had this plan. I had my journal and my books, and this was a trip where I was going to be on my own, finding my own way. But yeah, that's what happened.
The universe had other plans.
I guess so.
So, but I mean, I've seen you and Nikki together, and I think you're like one of the most beautifully loving couples I've ever witnessed. How did that start off?
Yeah, this is a huge story, I guess. Where to start? So if I just sort of deviate back to what I was doing, traveling around, practicing yoga, I was at Vikasa, sitting in the beanbag area with my journal, and I remember, because I was really into like what should I be doing with my life? That was sort of the stage of my life that I was at, and I'd sort of given myself that as the agenda for my trip, which was to like work it out, like sort your shit out. What is your purpose, your calling? Start living a life of purpose. And I had my mum's voice in my ear a lot. She's the voice in my head often when I'm doing the wrong thing or something along those lines. And she's not at all in like a school mother, school mistress type way, but in a kind of like, in my mind, she's the voice of like reason, but also morality and faith and spirituality too. She's sort of all of those things. So she was like, because she's an amazing example of unconditional love. I've never doubted her love for me in any way at all. But she's also had really high expectations of me. She's like, you're incredibly intelligent. You've got all these things going for you. You cannot waste all of that. So I've had her in my head. And I remember thinking, she'd always say things like, oh, what are you doing? Making all that money for those banks, shouldn't you be using that brain to help refugees or something like that, right? So she had this idea that I was a lawyer, I had all those skills that maybe they could be deployed for a better purpose. That could be a refugee advocate was the one that sort of kept coming up. And you remember, both my parents were social workers. By this time, my mum was and is the CEO of a welfare organisation called Jesuit Social Services, a large organisation in Australia that does a whole bunch of stuff for people coming out of prison, people on drugs, refugees, a whole bunch of amazing work they do. And so I'm there thinking, maybe I'm going to do something like that. And the funny thing was, I just had no desire to do it. Like, and I say this against myself. I just don't think I was particularly altruistic, but I just could imagine that I would quit my job and I'd get a job for a government organisation that worked with refugees, and on paper it would look way better. It would look like I could tell people at parties that I did this amazing thing, and people would be super impressed. That imagine leaving your job at a finance firm and going and helping refugees, amazing. But I just knew I wasn't going to be fulfilled on a daily basis. It sounded good, but it wasn't me. Maybe I'm not a very nice person. I'm not sure. But anyway, but I didn't know what else to do, so I was journaling all these ideas, and I couldn't really think of anything. And it was at that time that I met Nikki, just by chance at Vikasa. And again, in hindsight, I've obviously done a lot of reflection on everything that happened. What I think that was meant to show me was that I was asking the wrong question. It wasn't about what job I should do. That was the wrong question. I spent a lot of time pursuing a red herring, really, the wrong line of inquiry. The question was, how did I want to be? How did I want to live? What did I want to actually do with my life, but not in terms of a profession or a job. And then I was just gifted the love of my life, like just to turn up in my path and to show me that it's not about work. It was about like just living. So, the way I look at it, that trip, or that part of the trip showed me that, what I should be doing with my life was being in love with Nikki and spending all my time with the person that I was in love with. And then from that point on, a bit by bit, making decisions in line with that, decisions to like choose happiness, to be happy in the present moment, to not be so focused on forward planning and thinking, to just choose, this sounds really cliched, but to live each day as if it were your last. Like, what would you want to do? And we sort of made decisions to do that. In general, I don't think we can live every single moment, every single day like that, but you can stop deferring happiness to some, unforeseen time in the future and actually commit to it a bit more in the present moment. And that's sort of what I did. I was lucky, I think, because I met Nikki, and then the choice was really stark. It was like I could go back to living the old life that I had been, but I would be giving up that life because, Nikki wasn't going to come to Melbourne and hang out while I went and did 20-hour work days. So it became a real choice. I had to choose between one path and another path. And I say I was lucky because I had both of those paths in front of me and they were both there. I think a lot of people are on one path and they want something else, but they haven't yet been presented with something as obvious as the second path that I found.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I mean, this thing that you're talking about in living every day with happiness and like it's every day is the last, like, I think when you're doing it, as I imagine you're doing it now, it's quite easy. But like at that first stage, like how did you switch to that? Like, what was the first steps?
It was not an easy thing to do, I would say, but perhaps paradoxically, at the same time, it was the only possible choice I could make. So I met Nikki. That all happened. We both, we say that we fell in love pretty much the moment we saw each other, which was then borne out by what is it, 7 years later, and we're married with 2 kids and happier than we've ever been. So I think we made the right call so far, and things are going well so far anyway. But she moved to Melbourne with me because I was really tethered to my old life, my job, my career path, everything. And she was just floating around, teaching yoga, having a great time. But out of the two of us, it was she who could most easily up and move. And so she came to Melbourne, and we ended up living together in Melbourne for a year. But it was about, I can't remember, but it was pretty soon into that Melbourne trip that we decided that actually we were going to like change it up completely and leave that way of life behind. In terms of how that happened, I guess, she moved there. I went back to work and worked 20-hour days. And again, I just had the two options in front of me. I was doing what I was doing, but I had like the other option, like right there in Melbourne, and I was missing it. Again, it was like, how many times do I have to be, shown those two paths and keep doing what I was doing? And I could see, and I'm sure Nikki will back this up, but I could see the way it was going to unfold if we didn't make a drastic change. Nikki's not going to hang around in Melbourne forever. She's not going to just be a a wife who stays at home in my apartment in Fitzroy while I go and work 20-hour days and, fly off to Sydney every week. She just wouldn't have hung around. And so it became a pretty obvious choice. On a more practical level, the way that it really manifested was, Nikki came over and we very quickly looked to do some active meditations. And Nikki's, you would have experienced some of them in the YTT, but Nikki's big on active meditation. So for those listening in who are not aware of them, they're basically a form of meditation where you're not just sitting there, you're like shaking your body or doing certain active things. And the idea being that, if we have energy in our body, which we do, and we just move it, it can be via physical, like asana yoga practice, or these active meditations that the energy will sort of come up and come out, and we'll be able to process things. I guess is the high level theory, and that's how I've experienced it too. So she took me to a series of active meditations in Melbourne. The Osho dynamic meditation we did it 7 days in a row at 6 a.m, I think, in a church hall in St Kilda, Melbourne. And it was at the end of that week that I remember Nikki and I went for a walk around the Yarra River on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon before I had to go back to work the next day. And I remember just thinking, this isn't going to work. And I said to her, I was like, maybe I should quit my job and, we should just move to Thailand and just see what happens. And it was the first time I'd put it into words, what I guess I'd been like afraid to even contemplate, because, in hindsight, it wasn't such a big deal, but at the time it was huge. The job that I was in, this very clear career path, like no one does 9 years as a finance lawyer and quits on the door of like partnership, which is where I was. People always quit 2 years in, 3 years in, they go do something else and whatever, but no one does the hard yards. No one does the full 9 years and is literally, on the precipice of that next thing, which is like what everyone's been wanting for so long. And then it's like, no, I'm not interested. And there's no coming back from it. I couldn't have done that, gone to Thailand, and then a year later called up and said, hey guys, I want to come back. They would have been like, no, you're a flake. We can't have you back. So it was huge to pull out of, pull out of all of that. And also to do it without an alternative. It wasn't like I was like, yeah guys, I'm quitting and I'm going to become a management consultant or something like that. I was literally quitting and moving to Thailand to be unemployed and live on the beach. So it was a pretty crazy decision, but it just, when I remember saying that to Nikki when we went on that walk, and it was liberating. It was like, for the first, I was like, if I just let go of all of that, then there's the chance at a totally different life.
Wow. I guess there are a lot of people who want to do that sort of thing that might not have the love of your life next to you at the time of doing that. What would you advise them?
It's a really good question, and it's a really hard one, because I don't know, like, what can I say? If it had been me and I hadn't had that that sort of obvious alternative that I would otherwise miss out on placed in front of me, I don't know that I would have had the bravery and the courage to make that decision. I really don't. I think I would have spent a lot of time continuing what I was doing, thinking and journaling, but I don't know. I honestly don't know whether I would have made that decision. And I think that's what happened. The universe saw that I needed something so drastic in order to like really dislodge me from that path. Or at least I think it probably just expedited or accelerated it a lot. I would say to people in similar situations, I really do believe that, often things need to get like quite bad before you actually come to the point where you make a drastic change. It's like often in basic things like weight loss, right? Someone needs to often get really overweight before they decide that they need to lose weight. Whereas if you're just a little bit overweight, you sort of can keep being a little bit overweight for a long time. I think I would say a similar thing with me. I was, it took me to be a point of being like really, really unhappy in order to start thinking about a change. And then I was lucky enough to have that alternative life placed in front of me. One thing I would say is, in those moments or when you're having these thoughts, is to just, this might sound a little bit like woo-woo yoga, but it's to like keep your eyes open for signs, because I do think that what happens is, what happened for me anyway was that when I started making those decisions that were more like from the heart or heart-led decisions, it was almost like I was rewarded every time. So I really feel like I was rewarded for that decision, the brave decision to take 3 months unpaid leave, which from my boss's perspective would have looked like I wasn't taking my job very seriously. But because I took that, I dipped the toe in the water, I made that choice, then I got the Vikasa offering that came. Then I got Nikki, then I made that choice, then she came to Melbourne, and so on. It all just unfolded. I sort of feel like, again, to be a bit yogi about it, that the universe kind of looks after you when you start making choices that are more aligned with purpose and intentionality. So I would say, just keep the eyes open, watch for signs. I think you don't necessarily need to make the big sweeping gesture or the huge, drastic change. I think you can do little things and see that, and I hope it's true for you as it was for me, that I noticed quite obviously when I started making those kind of choices that it was like a little support from the universe, like a little reward. You did that, well done, here's something else amazing, and then so on. And if I look back on the last 7 years and I look at it as a series of those, I quit my job to move to Thailand without any thought of what my next job would be. Not long after, we became part owners of Vikasa, bought into the business. Now we're more successful in that front than I'd expected. So just like all things just kind of unfolded, and I hope they continue to do that. But for me, the biggest reason I think why that all happened was because I started making decisions from this place of like love, abundance, openness, as opposed to like the old Michael. Everything was about fear. It was about financial security and stability. And that's, I think, why everything felt like kind of hard work.
Yeah. Oh, I can relate to so much of what you're saying. So, well, tell me if we're jumping too fast now, but now tell me a little bit about like your life now and I mean jump the listeners to current state.
Okay, so for those who don't know me, I am the director of yoga and wellness at Vikasa, and Vikasa is a yoga academy where Annalie did her teacher training. We run teacher trainings. We have a hotel on Koh Samui in Thailand, 50 rooms. It's like not a normal hotel really, because it's a yoga hotel, but you can just come and stay and do yoga. You can come and do teacher trainings, you can do retreats, and we run all of those things. But we're expanding at the moment. We're building our second location on Phuket, which will be another 50 to 75 room hotel. That'll be ready in about a year. And we're expanding into wellness management, where we are running wellness services and offerings in other people's hotels. So we've just opened up in Sri Lanka and another one in Thailand as well. So we've got a lot going on, and Nikki and I are part owners of Vikasa and heavily involved. And so our day-to-day really changes. We'll have a teacher training on and we'll be teaching, full-time in the teacher training one day, and then the next day we'll be on, calls about construction in Phuket. And then the next day our nanny has her day off and we're looking after 2 kids. And so there's a lot right now. We say this all the time, but like it feels pretty intense, and maybe as intense as it's going to get, but beautifully intense, because our life it's interesting when we do things together, because it's our business, it's all for us. And when you do it in a way that is, I think, more broadly speaking, beneficial and useful and helpful to people, and you're able to combine all of that with family and with people that you love, then to me that's where the magic is. Yeah.
But I mean, you guys both, you're a family, you have kids together, you're also working together, you're teaching together, you have companies together, like you're spending so much time together, and there is still like when a person meets you guys, there is still just so much love around you. Like, how do you do that?
Look, I think I'm almost lost for words, because I don't know how to express my like gratitude for the fact that I met Nikki. I just think I'm very lucky. I think Nikki's an incredible person. See, some say, oh, you guys were just made for each other. I sort of just think that actually she's just an incredible person, and that anyone who met her would fall in love and would just have a great time. So I'm not so sure. I just think she's one of those unicorn people. You've met her, I'm sure you agree. Look, we spend all of our time together. It's a weird relationship in a way, in that we live together. We work together. We spend all of our time together, and our work life is like you've seen it. We've got one or two, both kids with us. We'll go do some work, and then we back with the kids and whatever. So we're literally always together. I can tell you right now, and I've been in other relationships in the past, obviously, but if we weren't deeply compatible and completely aligned, that's the kind of recipe for a relationship to end. If you spend all of your time with someone and there are cracks, those cracks will broaden and get bigger, they'll be exposed, and the relationship will come to an end. However, if you are meant to be together, if there is such a thing, but completely aligned, then being together all the time is what you need. It's what you need to keep you alive, motivated, driven, happy, all of those things. And that's how it is. People talk about in relationships, what do you do to like really nurture the relationship and like keep it alive, and schedule date nights and all these kind of things. And these are maybe really helpful tools for some people. But I've just never felt like that with Nikki at all. It's the opposite. It's like when I have to go to Phuket for a couple of days to like sign the deal that we did over there, I was missing her. I wanted to be back with her. If we have a night where Elsa's unhappy and I take her out of our bedroom and go sleep with her in another bedroom, I wake up and I miss Nikki and I feel like there's been some disconnection because we haven't been physically close for all that time. And so in a way, I think also we have nurtured the relationship because every time we're not together, I feel like we're disconnecting. And so we make choices all the time to always reconnect, to try to minimize the disconnection, to be together all of the time, and to, when we have to be apart, then come back very, very quickly. And I think maybe that is part of the recipe for it being so beautiful, because most people's normal lives, even if they meet and they're feeling really connected, then one goes off to a job, one goes off to something else. You're having different conversations, you're having different experiences, you're growing and evolving in different ways, and then you have to come back together, and then there is a recalibration as you come back, as you integrate all those different experiences, and then you meet again in that. We're having all the same experiences, doing all the same things. So everything that happens to us happens to both of us, and we grow and evolve together. I'm not some kind of relationship expert or pretending to be. I've had some, all sorts of relationships in the past. But this to me is very, very different. And 7 years in, it feels the way that it feels. And so I can only explain that. And that's how I explain it. Whether it works for others or not, that is what absolutely works for us.
Yeah. But to kind of go back then to how it started, because, if you've been in a few different relationships before, at least for me, it can kind of feel scary to commit to a person in that way, because, if you've had a breakup that has maybe changed a lot in your life and so forth, maybe you're like scared of committing. And then when you have two people meeting, maybe that fear is in both of them and so forth. And there is so much like turmoil in the meeting part, but there is also so much like attraction and like all the good stuff as well, and like the hormones and all of that. Like, how in all of that did you know that this was what you had found?
Well, I think the answer is that I reject the premise of that question, because there was no turmoil. There were no competing instincts or beliefs or concerns. For the first time in my life, it was just a complete yes. And Nikki says this a lot about things. She's like, if it's not a yes, then it's a no. And this was just like a yes on all fronts. I didn't have a second of doubting it, of thinking, is this right? I think my only, which is unusual for me, my only doubt was, shit, I hope she feels the same way too, because otherwise I'm screwed. That's how heavily I had fallen. But there was not a second of, is this right? Or, can I commit, and all those things. So the first time in my life to have just completely like fallen in love. And that's why, I'm always hesitant to talk too much about this, especially as an example for other people, because there is a big part of me that deeply believes that I've been incredibly, incredibly lucky to have met the one person in the whole world, to have stumbled across the one person in the whole world who was just meant for me, the perfect person. And I'm hesitant to talk about that too much, because I don't want to give advice to people like, oh, just do this. And like, because I think I was super lucky. If someone could do all the right things, make all the right decisions, do all of that kind of stuff, and maybe not stumble across that, maybe that's the case. Because I don't think I was necessarily doing all the right things. I think just I was, I don't know. I have no idea how or why it happened. And that's why I'm hesitant to, as I say, to provide too much advice about it, because it was just a beautiful thing that changed my entire life.
Yeah. But it's nice also to hear that you're like, I don't know the English word you used, but I knew what it meant. But like that, it wasn't that sort of doubt. I mean, that says also something to not maybe create it when it's not there. Kind of just leaning.
Yeah. Exactly. I think that maybe it was unequivocal or something like that. But I didn't let I'm a mindy person, and I didn't let my mind sort of take over and try and overanalyze it. It was just again, this is also once you start practicing yoga and you start getting more into like energy and the way things feel, then you just it becomes more of a feeling. It's like, this feels right. And you learn to trust those things a little bit more, I think. Whereas, if rewind, years before that, I think I wasn't as in tune with those kind of things. I might have not have noticed all of those signals. And so I guess, when it comes down to it, really, if there's any advice to be given around this kind of thing, around relationships, around love, following your heart, from my own experience, it is about working on yourself, doing practices of presence, practicing yoga, doing things like that to better get to know and understand yourself, so that when those opportunities do come across your path, you're tuned into them and open and receptive. Because, I guess I have to give myself some credit. When I met Nikki, I had been practicing yoga for a long time. It had caused me to take that unpaid leave, to put a break into my life, to go to seek out, new horizons, different experiences. And then I was rewarded in that with meeting Nikki. So, but it's not the advice is not around, how to find the right person or anything. It's about how to do I guess your own work. And that, to therefore be in the right state and time in your life to meet the person when they're there.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, but you started off telling us about growing up in this community and so forth. Like, how do you compare, because now we are in present time, how do you compare that experience with what you're in today? And what is that?
Yeah. I think the main thing is, I've been reflecting on this a little bit recently. It's like, what's the red thread, or what are the elements of commonality there? And there's one that sort of jumps out at me, which is interesting for me, because it wasn't something that I expected, and it wasn't something I really thought of in myself at all. And you can rewind to my discussion around, my mum telling me to be a refugee advocate, and me thinking, I'm not that interested. But I think something that sort of binds those two experiences together, my early life in the hippie commune and my life now, albeit in very different ways, is this idea of service, that there is some real substance to life, some real fulfillment when you are living a life, at least in part, a life of service, a life where you're devoting part of your attention to doing things that are helpful and beneficial to other people. Because if I, just by way of contrast, I look back on my job as a lawyer, and it was, as I said, fulfilling on a daily basis and intellectually stimulating, and I enjoyed it, but there was no that kind of substance to it. It couldn't have been said to have been of service or of sort of broadly positive impact, I guess. Whereas what I'm doing now, although of course we're business owners and we do it for profit, but whenever we turn up on day one of a YTT or a retreat, we're lit up by the prospect that we can change people's lives for the better. And that's what makes it really, really interesting and really, really exciting, and what makes us do it again and again. Otherwise, you could do a YTT, and once you've done it 3 times, I've got this, on to the next thing. But we do it every second month. We do it again and again, because everyone is different. Because every time that happens, we take 30 people and we take them all on journeys like you and your cohort went through, where people's lives were changed. People were transformed. So it really is this idea of being of service, I think that is this sort of common thread that, in the end, I did take my mum's advice. I just put it into practice in a different way. She, for sure, has lived a life of service in her way, and that's given her fulfillment and all sorts of things. And this is my version of doing that too. Again, typically in my own way, not the same. I'm not living in a hippie commune. I couldn't bear to live with other people than those in my immediate family, I could kind of tell you. So definitely not doing that. There's no shared finances with a bunch of other families either. But the substance of the work that we do on a daily basis, even just people who come and stay at Vikasa from on a yoga holiday, we often hear the feedback is that like this place is transformative. It changed my life, and so I think that is the really interesting part for me. That's what makes it. I'm not just using my legal skills to now expand a hotel business. I'm actually, and I don't want to get too like messianic about it, but I'm actually doing something which is of positive, which has a huge benefit in people's lives, I believe.
Yeah, and that of course has ripple effects when they go back to their homes and so forth.
Yeah.
And like because you said in the beginning or in the middle when we were talking a bit about yoga that now you have like kind of debunked what yoga is and all of that. Can you share a bit about I don't even know what question to ask, so can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It's just more a matter of like, I took my, we all come into things with our whole series, with our set of circumstances, our education, everything we've been through before. And what I typically took into my yoga journey was, again, this like very like critical mind, slightly skeptical, questioning, scientific. And so I didn't just come into sort of yoga and like, someone talked about the chakras and I'm like, oh yeah, I believe all of that and whatever. I was very, questioning, but open. Like I was, I really wanted to, I'd felt it. So from that place of experience, I'm like, okay, I want to know more. I'm inclined to believe, but now tell me more. And so I sort of took that attitude into it. And, what I found, what I loved about Costa, who's the founder of Vikasa, and my best friend, and what I love about him and his approach and Vikasa is it's just no bullshit. All that, the accoutrement, the stuff that comes with, the fisherman pants and that kind of stuff, it's just like rubbish. And Costa, to his credit, has accepted all of that, and we don't need any of it. So everything that I've learned through him and on my yoga journey in general, it's not about any of that other stuff. It's just very, 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 very basic. So basic as to be boring at times. We get often asked, could Vikasa go and like do some stuff at a yoga festival? And we just say, I don't think you really want us to be headlining your yoga festival because people who haven't practiced with us before will just be bored. There's nothing sexy or attention grabbing about it. It's right? It's like long holds and metronomic music. It's not like a party tune and some fast paced vinyasa. But, as I say, all of that stuff has just been stripped away, and what you're left is with basic, authentic practices that work. And that's sort of where, that's my yoga practice. Pranayama, basic breathing practices, basic asana practice, physical postures, with a real focus on long holds. And long holds are there. It's for a scientific reason. It's basically for stress adaptation. Hold something for a long period of time. Notice what happens in your mind. You get stressed out, you want to get out of that situation, but you don't go out of the situation, you stay in it, you realize that you're okay, that you can handle those situations, you come out the other side unscathed and you're fine. Then the next time you find yourself in a real life stressful situation, you remember, some part of you remembers, I don't have to run away from this. I'm okay. I can be here. I can survive it. I can sail out the other side unscathed. So it's just practices like that you do again and again and again. The main thing that yoga has done for me is just slowed me down. I was super reactive in the past. Driving along, someone cuts me off, give them the rude finger, yell out the window, like instant reaction, and then spend like the next 3 hours, like these fluctuations in my mind, going through it again and again. Did I say the right thing? Could I have said something else? But it's just like reverberating there. With a yoga practice, it gives me 2 or 3 seconds. I get cut off. I get triggered in exactly the same way I used to be. That hasn't changed for me at all. I still get that triggered. But I have a pause, take a deep breath. I now no longer normally feel the need to scream out the window, and therefore then the fluctuations die down much, much quicker. And so I'm living a life that's like far less up and down. There's still the triggers, but it's like this kind of in the middle. And that's what the yoga practices of yoga and associated practices have done. Slow everything down, give you time to think before just being reactionary, and all through basic stuff that you don't need to believe. It's not like believing in a particular doctrine. It's just doing some practices and noticing how they make you feel.
Yeah, it's also interesting because when I came to Vikasa, I had been traveling for a while, so I was quite chilled down. So I don't think I got some of that when you do the whole long holds, like that wasn't the mind going, it was more my muscles going. But now when I've come back home and I do the long holds, and I realize that, I mean, even a like 30 or 40-second hold, it makes me stressed because like I've gotten up so much tempo while being back in Stockholm that it's like it's actually helping me remembering to slow down. So it's it's super interesting to kind of now get to see the more mental effects of it than just the physical.
And you'll have found that's kind of unusual in that most people who come to us, they come from Stockholm or from Berlin or something, so they've come from a fast-paced lifestyle, and so they notice it straight away. So you're getting it after the fact, which is awesome. But what I also find is that in cities, or in life in general, I guess, but definitely in Western cities, the practice of yoga is often done in such a way that it's fast-paced. It's often vinyasa style. It's often with like pumping music. And what happens and by the way, I love to practice in that way too. It's super fun, but it's really stimulating and activating. And often, we went back to Melbourne for the birth of our youngest Nils 9 months ago. Went to some studio classes, and after practicing, having drunk the Vikasa Kool-Aid and been practicing in that way for years, and going back to that, I had a couple of moments in Shavasana, which by the way lasted for like 2 minutes. Where I felt almost like motion sick from all like the up and the down. I was like shaking and full on energized. And what really happens is you're meeting like city people with like city high energy, high vibes with more of those practices, which then just elevate again and again and again. So there's not really that coming back down, which is what I believe a yoga practice has could and should do, and definitely has the potential to do. But the other thing about that is that we're resistant to it. If we're in that energy of like go, 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 we go to a practice and we want more of that because it meets us on the level that we're at. And then it just compounds and compounds and compounds. That's one of the reasons, again, why people wouldn't want to do a Vikasa class at a yoga festival, because they want the high energy type thing. But when people come to Vikasa and they practice in that way, we have a captive audience for a short period of time, a week, a month, and so on. And that's all it takes. People will come for a week and practice. It probably takes 2 or 3 practices. And again, you don't have to believe anything. You just feel it. You feel everything change. You have that more time. You're not as stressed out. It's not like you get the euphoric feeling you can get after a fast-paced flow, which is a really nice feeling. But this feeling of, again, it's cliched, but this feeling of equanimity, of balance, of not too high, not too low, just like I'm just like floating here and everything is good.
Yeah. It's interesting. Maybe we should send the Vinyasa style yoga to like more slower rural areas, and then the Vikasa style into the cities, and we would balance the world out.
That's exactly what we should do. But again, we just have resistance to it. We don't always seek out what we need. We sort of seek out what we want. And again, we spend a lot of time talking about this in our teacher trainings, especially our advanced ones, who are the 300 hours for people who've already done a 200 and actually teaching about how to not just fall into the trap of being people pleasers and giving them what they want, but also take a little bit of responsibility and go, I know what people need. I've done a lot of practice and education in that area. How can I give them? Because when you teach a Vikasa complete class to people who haven't experienced it before, you're not just seeing smiling faces when you walk around the room. You're seeing resistance and people wanting to come out of shapes. But you sort of have to suck it up, because you know that it's worth it, and you know that the impacts and the benefits that it'll have. But it doesn't mean that it's easy.
No, definitely. So in the beginning also you shared that you were currently thinking a little bit more about solitude, and I kind of, for me, it goes in a bit to this conversation we're having now about we're being so stressed and in the Western world, and we're like we're filling our lives so full that there is no time for like contemplation and stuff. What are your thoughts on solitude now?
Yeah, well, exactly that. It's as I said, I listened to a couple of podcasts on the topic, which sort of got me, interested, and then read a book or two about it. And just this idea that, I think generally people are agreed that, like, for example, we shouldn't let our kids have too much screen time. These are like sort of common views that are held. But if you go a little bit deeper into like, okay, well, why? What's the problem with it? And it really is that it's like it just eats up our attention, and then okay, well, what's the problem with that? Well, all of the potential for creativity and growth and expansion and all these beautiful things is gone because we're just having our minds numbed by watching things on our screen, scrolling through things. And it's one of those really interesting things. Like I bring it back to my experience doing Vipassana meditation. And Vipassana is where you'll go away. It depends on whether you do the Gwenka method or other methods, but you'll go away into like a Buddhist monastery for a period of time, 7, 9, or 10 days, and you'll be in silence, and you meditate, and you do meditation practices, anapanasati, just watching your breath, and it's super boring. Like, that's the main thing. It's super boring. But the point is, you move through that boredom into all sorts of amazing things that come afterwards. And when I've done it, the first 3 days or 4 days are, for me, excruciating. I have so much going on in my head. And I want to journal, I want to write things down, and I want to do all sorts of stuff. It's so boring. But then the feeling after you get through those first 3 or 4 days, you've bored yourself to death, and then like epiphanies are coming up. You're having all these realizations. You've got all these plans, and it's the most creative, most fertilely creative I've ever felt is in that period. But I had to push hard through 4 days of boredom to get there. And I think that it's like that's happening to us every single day, but just not so obviously. We're never wanting to sit there and be bored, and so those those moments of creativity, we're not giving them the scope, the time, and the space to come up. So I feel really strongly about that. I don't know what to do about it. I've been, listening to podcasts, and they're like got all sorts of tips about it, like, delete these apps off your phone and whatever. But it's really hard. I'll be really successful at, putting my phone away for a couple of days, and then I'll just, I'll fall back into the trap again as well. And, I can justify it to myself. It's work. I need to do this kind of stuff. It doesn't really matter. Like, if the phone's there, I'll just find myself scrolling. So it's, I say all that to be clear. I've found I've had these realizations about solitude, but I'm no exemplar of that particular method. I'm a constant work in progress with it, but I just feel there's utility in it. I think if we can let ourselves be bored, that's when we decide to like write a book or do some really beautiful, important things like that. And I don't know how much great literature, I wonder, are we losing because people are just watching hours of Netflix. I've got to say, I digress for a second. When I had my midlife crisis and I was feeling very bad, Netflix was the best thing of all time because I didn't have to think or process things. I just watched hours and hours of Netflix. And as a coping mechanism, it's probably one of the healthier ones in that acute period of time.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just that we tend to get stuck in it. And for me, I have this, when I was kind of at my worst, maybe 2 years ago, before I started the path that led to the journey, I had a coach, and he advised me to just take a walk of an hour every day without a phone or anything like that. And the idea of that at that point was that excruciating. And I think, like, for me, this is the thing that happens. Like, we pile up so many things that we never have time to declutter or debunk, that you need 4 days when you get to a Vipassana just to kind of like process everything that has happened in your head that you haven't had time to process. I think, like, since you have small kids, like, I think it's even more difficult to you because you have even other sort of things. But for me, it's not just about the TV. It's about like all interactions with all people. Like, everything is input, and we don't have the time to like process it. So we never get to the core of our own voices because everything is reactions to everything else.
Yeah, exactly. And like, the smartphones are the ones that get all the attention, and that's where all the focus is in this sort of new discussion around solitude. But you're totally right. Interpersonal interactions are a huge one as well. And that's a big thing that they talk to you about in Vipassana, that they recommend like noble silence. So it's not just silence, but it's looking down, not making eye contact and so on. Because I found, again, in my experience doing Vipassana, I remember like the first day, like, it was new to it all. And so someone came across my path and I was like smiling like this, whatever. And I spent probably 2 hours being like, why did I smile at that person? And you know what I mean? And so it's like, it just was that other distraction, which then just occupied my mind for a long time. So the more of that stuff you can take out of it, the more space there is for other more interesting stuff.
Yeah. I remember morning. So when you're doing the YCT at Vikasa, you don't speak to people in the morning. And I remember one morning I woke up and I was so tired. So like out of habit, I just said hello to someone on my way to the bathroom. And I was like, oh no, I said hello.
Bad student.
And I had to go I had to go and apologize to that student later in the day when we were allowed to speak again. Yeah. All right. So I usually end these conversations with the 3 questions. So the first one is, what are you working on with yourself right now?
What am I working on with myself right now? I think, I'm at an interesting point right now where I've, had this big life change, went on this sort of new journey. And it's now been some time, right? So all of this stuff happened to me, I want to say 6, 7, 8 years ago now. What I'm finding is the thing that I'm most commonly reflecting on is the idea that it's not, okay, tick and you move on and do the next thing, that they're constant, like life is a series of like the same lessons again and again and again. I found yoga and meditation and changed my life. At the moment, I'm super busy with work and with kids that my practice is not as it should be. And I'm noticing familiar patterns repeating. I'm noticing a shortness of temper with my kids and all of those things. And so so I think the thing that's looming large for me now is that it wasn't like, oh, congratulations, Michael, you went on your journey of self-discovery and you tick that box and you're discovered now. You're all good. Yeah. It's that it's a constant process. It needs to be revisited, and I'm just sitting with that at the moment and thinking of ways to do it. I'm super lucky though, because unlike a whole bunch of other things, the answer is for me, it's just yoga. It's like all you got to do is make a little bit of time to practice. Doesn't need to be long. Yoga and pranayama. And I know if I get up and do 20 minutes of pranayama in the morning, or some sun salutations or something, I'm a whole different person. I react in a totally different way when Elsa annoys me than if I don't do that. So luckily the tools are there, and I think that's the beautiful thing with a journey of self-discovery, is that it's not like you go back to square one every time. You do mature, you grow. You still need reminders, but you've got tools that make each step easier. I'm just at the moment thinking about that a lot, recommitting to that, reminding myself of the importance of practice.
That's nice. So is there anything that I should have asked you about that I haven't asked you about?
Not really, not that I can think of. I think it's like, as always, I was, humbled that you were interested in talking to me about this. And I was thinking throughout this talk that you should be speaking to Nikki, because most people would want to speak to Nikki instead of me. But I was thinking that if anything, you probably do want to speak to her, because getting her side of the story and having the matching parts would be really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it was lovely talking to you, Michael. I'm so happy that we did this.
Thanks, Annalie. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for listening to Peel and Reveal, the podcast where we share stories about joy, purpose, and self-discovery. In next week's episode, I talk with Marie Pettersson, a licensed medical doctor who shifted her focus to holistic health after recovering from burnout. We explore her journey into functional and energy medicine and how she helps women reclaim their balance and self-healing power. Make sure to mark your calendar.